and call this virtual board workshop of the David Douglas School Board. Today is Thursday, January 21st. Welcome, everyone. As always, let's go ahead and start with the Native American land acknowledgement. Today, I would like to acknowledge the people whose land we are gathered on. Present-day Portland is located on the traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers. Let us also acknowledge the robust Native community made up of tribal diversity that originates from around the country and whose journeys have brought them to Portland by ways of forced displacement or seeking opportunities. Today, these same communities celebrate their heritage, showing resilience and tenacity that would be greatly admired by their ancestors. All right, so this is a board workshop. As we shared earlier this year, it is important for us to have some time to reflect back on some of the initial goals that we had prioritized for the superintendent and district-wide. We also particularly felt like this would be a helpful conversation given just the amount of questions that we have as board members and as the David Douglas District in terms of comprehensive distance learning and new guidance for reopening and just across the board where we are on our planning efforts and equity goals. And so thought that it would make sense to go over where we've been, where we're trying to go, and what the new guidance and realities are putting in front of us. So that is the purpose or the some of the overarching goals for today. Feel free, if you all have any questions, to go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll try to lift them up for Ken during his presentation as well. And then with that, I will turn it over unless Sahar wants to share any other remarks. I'll go ahead and turn it over to the superintendent.
Great, thank you so much, Andrea. And it is great to see all your faces. Looking forward to this evening. As Andrea said, going to spend some time looking at the 4 goals we developed, superintendent's goals. They're also district goals, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But ultimately reviewing where we're at on those and some of the work on that. I wanted to recognize and identify and flag that I did send you an email with this slide deck. So if you want to follow along, it might be easier that way, but just so you know you have that. I also want to recognize after we talk about those 4 goals, we are going to specifically go into the strategic plan, where we're at in that process, the equity plan, where we're at in that process, and then CDL supports and CDL reopening. I also know that this Tuesday, there was a significant release, RSSL guidance. I was in meetings most of the day, most of the morning, all of cabinet, all of basically staff in general. A lot has been going on, and we could do a whole separate presentation on that. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions that we can weave in tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I have the answers to tonight. But ultimately, I do want to recognize that and basically know there are definitely a lot of questions within our community, from our staff, from our students, all involved, because there are some fairly significant changes, and we're moving forward and developing plans with those changes in mind. So with that said, Derek, if you want to get the slide deck up, we will transition here a bit. And first and foremost, I want to recognize in this slide deck that, typically I've given these reports through emails or writing, so it's very text heavy. I don't expect that you're going to read every single word, or I'm going to. That's part of the reason that we have the slide deck. We'll have the questions tonight, but please know anything that we don't answer or we don't get to tonight, or if you have any questions, I'm a phone call or email away, and we can connect individually, we can connect with small groups, whatever works best for you. Ultimately, we will continue to follow up. But I know some of these slides will be a bit small, and we'll ask Derek to zoom in on a few things, and we'll kind of go from there. With that said, I want to start with a positive report, a very exciting report. We've been sitting on some embargoed information, and that embargoed information specifically has to do with our graduation data and graduation rate. Again, this is one of those ones that's a bit hard to read. Derek, I don't know if you can zoom in a little bit, and you have to scroll. But the reality is I just want to point out and recognize all the hard work. We're very excited because in David Douglas School District, we don't believe the graduation rate is solely on the backs of the high school. We know that we are pre-K-12 system, and we know that how our third graders do is how our seniors do, and how our sophomores do is how our sixth graders do. And truly an aligned education and a system built on believing in kids with supports and structures for all involved, ultimately to take away barriers for our educators so they can truly serve our kids, makes a difference. And just a snapshot of this information overall is basically every one of the David Douglas High School four-year cohort graduation rate went up from last year. We don't have that date from last year, but we do have the comparisons on the slide that shows Multnomah County and shows the state. And you can see that just about every category we outperform the state average as well as the county average. So again, that's due to a lot of hard work, a lot of our amazing principals and leaders, a lot of educators in the classrooms, a lot of support staff in the classrooms, a lot of support staff in our offices, the people on the buses, food service, everywhere in our system. Our ask is that our adults believe in our kids, support in our kids, provide a welcoming, safe environment that ultimately leads to success. And obviously there's areas for growth. Obviously there's still achievement gaps. And we know when we talk about equity, we should not be able to predict outcomes based on a person's skin color, based on any perceived ability, based on someone's zip code or socioeconomic status. And there's still areas where there's a gap. So there's work for us to do. But what I'm very proud of is that we are outperforming the state average and that we're continuing to grow. I'll also say that, you know, a bit of an anomaly last year, right? We know that we know that last year's different. So we have to recognize that. We have to recognize the impact of that. And, you know, there's people that might argue that, well, we you know, it's a lot easier for students, or you know, that might be, and there might be some rules and different things that we implemented as required by the state. But ultimately, the bottom line is we could go the other way as well. There's many districts, unfortunately, where the graduation rate went the other way. And the bottom line, ours is showing growth even through this time of crisis and this time of pandemic. So a lot more to come. Obviously, a lot of work this year we're talking about, and ultimately that continued work to connect to kids and help them achieve and help them open doors to opportunity is what we're looking at. But as you scroll through those numbers, as you have an opportunity, if you have any questions, anything you want to bring to my attention or wondering about, please let me know. Go the goal measurement of the United States increase graduation rate students of color by 3%. Can you prove where we are on this based on the So Andrea, specifically, if you see what we don't have here is we do not have, this was just released this morning, all of it, some of it disaggregated, but we can look at, so I don't have in front of me what last year's was compared to this year's, unfortunately. But yeah, so our, what I would need to do, and I can, as we go through this presentation a little bit, I can see if I can pull up the file and disaggregate that for you. If not, we will get it to you, if not by the end of tonight, by tomorrow morning. That ultimately shows where our increases were for our specific groups and subgroups. So with that said, again, the kind of just released, you probably saw it in the press. So we just wanted to add it to this. So it's a little bit of a snapshot right now. Next slide, please, Derek. So as we transition, looking on the focus of the progress towards the superintendent's and district goals, the reason I say district goals is each year, as we, and actually in the past, we've done multiple year goals, but this year we did a 1 year goal for a number of reasons. But whether it be a multiple year or 1 year, I want to remind the board that what we do is after I set my goals, after the board reviews them, after we go through and adopt them, what I do is sit down with cabinet, sit down with our division leaders, and they all set goals related to these goals as well. So ultimately, all of our goals are tied together and tied into a system. So just wanted to make sure you understood that as we transitioned here and talked about the goals. Um, like I said before, we've had multiple year goals, but this year's is a 1 year. I am very excited to look at our strategic plan and ultimately be talking about the end of this year and the beginning of next year, multi-year goal aligned to our strategic plan. And we're going to be able to talk to that a little bit later. And then finally, just look forward to the discussion tonight. Please, if there's other questions, Andrea already put one in the chat. Derek's already texted me, you guys, because he's opening the field to get the last year's data so we can compare that and look at it as well, Andrea. So with all of that said, as we transition here, reminder, as we develop goals and as we set this year in motion based on everything that was happening with the pandemic, we adopted and looked at some guiding principles. And those guiding principles ultimately helped our work, helped everything that we were looking at as far as setting goals, but also just guided some of our conversations. So when you look at those, you could see that basically the number one is centering on equity, ensuring that we're doing everything we can to use an equity lens and differentiate to meet the needs of our students, all of the learning needs and social, emotional, and other needs that they may have in this process. We also identified and know that safety and wellness throughout this process is essential, and keeping that at the forefront in everything we do, specifically, especially this year, but always. If our students are not safe, then what are we doing? We also spent a lot of time focusing on and cultivating, connection and relationships, and ultimately the importance of that. It's quite fascinating. We received some of our Youth Truth data we'll be talking about a little bit later tonight. And on that, we have actually an increase or feedback perception data from a number of our students that say they believe that relationships have improved and are trending up. So even though we are in distance learning, many students are feeling like the attention they're receiving and the connection they're receiving around relationships is positive, which you might not always predict. And then finally, that innovation, thinking about innovation and how do we continue to innovate, learn what we're doing ultimately every day with CDL, how are we pivoting, how are we keeping moving forward, but then also how do we innovate in what we're learning, what's working well, and adopt that and bring that forward as we start discussing and getting deeper and deeper into return plans. So the next slide is the first goal. And Derek's going to switch slides here. So that goal specifically, it has to do with advancing equity. And when we talk about the goal, we're talking about advancing racial equity and system structures and cultures to ensure equitable school district that is always student focused and responsive to student needs. Ultimately, the ask and the goal is that the superintendent, me, my team, create the conditions that support an inclusive culture and that provide staff, students, and families the tools to collaborate, partner, and ensure that every student receives equitable education. I'm going to kind of just summarize. I don't feel like I need to read every one of these, but if you want me to, please let me know. And I am going to clip along because there's a lot here. So please stop, flag in the chat, raise a flag, hand, whatever you need to do. So the goal measurements, we talked about completion and implementation of an approved equity plan, and we're actually going to review that at the end of this presentation. All of the plans that we're implementing, we're going to review towards the end of this presentation, and then also the development of an equity subcommittee or new committee to establish a plan to eliminate anti-Black racism and white supremacy in the David Douglas School District. So with that said, I'm excited to report on a number of different areas and directions we're going as a district, and really proud of our district leadership, our administrative team, and our teachers who are leaders within our district and all the work they're doing. Specifically, I know in a time of a pandemic, it might seem like, okay, all our focus is just on the pandemic. And obviously we definitely have been push and pulled, and each day, each week, there's been different changes that we've had to respond to. But our ability and hopefully hard work to stay focused on the importance of advancing equity, I think you'll see here in the next few slides. Next slide, please, Derek. Sorry about that, you guys. So I talked about the equity plan, ultimately the collaboration, and as we're talking about this equity plan and developing, just really excited to work to report on the collaboration and how excited I am to have our staff of color report to us and share with us and take a leadership role in developing their freedom dreams and how those line up with our equity goals and the direction we're going. DDEA, also the first time ever, has developed an equity committee and has been working with us, partnering with us side by side, ultimately through the staff of color freedom dreams, but also through bargaining targets and looking at bargaining and looking how we continue to be a better district through an equity lens. We also have been engaged with the McRin work, been very engaged in the MESD Grow Your Own, and continuing to develop and increase that program. Also, we have individuals from our district involved in the COSA Equity Advocacy Board and how we're trying to have a statewide voice and to help the equity process, along with our partnerships with SUN and our CBOs. Some of the professional development that we've done to date and are continuing to do, ultimately all of our buildings have building equity teams, and those building equity teams are on many different journeys. Some of them are much deeper in the work than others, but we're doing everything from courageous conversations, culturally responsive teaching, and the brain, white fragility, or just to name a few different trainings, book studies, different things that are happening in buildings. We've had training in speakers, individuals such as Aaron Jones, Building Bridges to Equity series. And we've also, if you go down one more bullet there, you'll see the David Douglas School District has started a Bar We series, which stands for Building Anti-Racist White Educators. And that was generated from one of our teacher leaders, one of our TOSAs, who basically brought that to our district and just did a full reach out to our entire staff and said, would you be interested? And I believe when it started, we had over 80 plus educators just right out of the gate say, yes, we would love to have the opportunity, and have been very involved in that series. Also have looked at anti-racism and universal design for learning, the training through the MESD and COSA, and then also the COSA equity series we've been very involved in. Next slide, Derek. So the next slide also talks about kind of more the classroom instruction side. So thinking about equity within the classroom, and ultimately some of the work we've done, strategies that support equitable access to classroom instruction. You could see these are all live links as well. You can check those out now, later, but we have been very involved in universal design for learning, and which is a strategy for meeting the instructional needs of all students through intentional instructional design. So that is currently in process within our district. We also have strategies that support the inclusive school culture and health and wellness, and from social emotional curriculum that we've purchased, training and supports for social emotional curriculum, and those are both linked as well. The Toolbox Project and Character Strong support the well-being of school-based staff, which we've take a role in school-wide mindfulness, implementing in 8 of our 9 elementary schools. Increased focus on building relationships between educators and students through the use of restorative practices. We've partnered with and used national educators for restorative practices in that work, and then also strong behavior interventions and supports. So we are still a PBIS district, believe strongly in PBIS, and try to implement PBIS on a regular basis. And then the last slide in this goal, and then I'll stop and kind of open it up a little more to a conversation, is also when we think of equity, it's within the classroom, but it's also resources. So our technology division landed on advancing equity and using technology ultimately to ensure that all students had a technology as a tool. You know the rollout, you know all the work that our district did to ensure that technology was in students' hands, the work to adapt and develop a single student dashboard. And all of these might seem like simple projects, but they're not. Much deeper than they sound here, and ultimately have a very significant impact. You can go down through from the touchscreens that the board approved. Thank you very much. The 408 T-Mobile wire hotspots that we've distributed to families, the ongoing support when Chromebooks break, when we need to replace, how we're kind of rolling through, and then now the planning, if we come back into hybrid, how do we get those computers from students back in classroom, and what does that look like overall? So with that said, the very last item within the superintendent's goal and advancing equity that reporting on, and we're just starting this, not from the standpoint of the hiring plan, but the next slide, Derek, is the strategic hiring plan. And what I mean by just starting is we're entering into the hiring season. Obviously, we will be this spring looking at hiring a number of positions. I know I shared an email with the board about our administrative positions that we'll be looking at and hiring, but the reality is how we continue to grow our own and develop those grow your own pathways, develop that path, that pipeline, how we better recruit, hire, retain, kind of going through that process. And through those expanding those partnerships, you can see we have a number of grants that we're currently involved in as we're navigating this process. So that's the first goal, advancing equity. Again, the measurements, the equity plan, but it's not as easy as, yes, we're on track for the equity plan, which we will report out a little later. There's just a number of other items, obviously, and work that we're engaged in. So I'm going to pause there and make sure there are not any other questions before I ask Derek to go on to the next goal. Okay, wait time. It looks like.
Question.
Yeah, please, Andrea.
I'm also noticing, and I know you touched on it a little bit, but perhaps if you can expand a little bit more on the hiring practices around recruitment and retention of diverse administrators, faculty, and staff. You had also mentioned earlier that a lot of the work of predominantly the Freedom Dreams of staff of color had also prioritized that. And so just curious if you can share a little bit more specifically how those conversations are going.
Yes. So ultimately, real general level, the conversations are going very well. We're going to get into a little more depth later, but I will ask Candy if she wants to share a bit more when we talk about our hiring and that process and that group, because she's involved in that group with the Freedom Dream team.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. So we have, Andrina and myself have had, one meeting, I will say, to plan for the agenda for the larger group meeting. And so it will be she and I leading that group, and it's the Freedom Dream around diversification. And our first steps and plans in that meeting are to go over our current grow your own pathways that we are engaging in and continuing to develop and grow. Along with, we're going to look at the strategic hiring plan. And excuse me, there's very specific goals in that strategic hiring plan around recruiting, hiring, and then retaining staff of color. And so we're going to, as a team, look over the strategies and evaluate what's working, what's not working, what do we need to add, how can we make that more robust. So that meeting, I believe, it might be at the end of next week, where the whole team will meet and go over that. I'm not sure if I answered all your questions.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think that just continues to be a priority. At least I know for myself, and as you know, you've been hearing in these conversations as well. Something that is important for lots of other staff and district folks as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Candy, I'm sorry, maybe I missed. Who did you say was meeting next week? You said we. Who's the we?
So I am what I'll say chairing the meeting with Andreina. And then we have invited, she invited 2 or 3 other staff of color. I invited another staff of color. And then we have our HR manager, Darcy Powers, who's going to join us. And we're starting out with this small group to begin with. And then we'll take all of that information and then share that out with the broader group, which involves DDA union leadership, as well as staff of color.
And the conversations that were started at the beginning of last year with the staff of color around hiring, and we started breaking into those small groups and having those kind of dream sessions of what some of the strategies might look like. Is the intent to include some of those suggestions in this actual process?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I believe that some of those suggestions that we had, I remember the charts that we had up in the curriculum conference room. I believe that we've even added some of those already to the strategic hiring plan, but definitely those are a part of that. They've been a part of this process, and revisiting those and really just looking at where are we at with all of it. Those strategies, along with what's in our strategic hiring plan currently, and looking at what's working, what's not, how do we know, what are some very specific goals we could have in each area, and again, including our staff of color in giving them voice in that.
Great, thanks.
Really part of this, and again, I believe our HR department, and ultimately when we developed that strategic hiring plan, took a lot of different information and did great work. But the one thing we didn't do very good, to be quite honest, my fault, is we did not include staff of color specifically, and we didn't have a staff of color affinity group at the time, but that's no excuse. So back to the nothing about us without us, and really having that conversation and doing a better job. So although one, it's time anyway to review our strategic hiring plan, it's been implemented and it's time to really look at it. Now that we have this team that we're partnering with, to be able to truly go through it together, with our staff of color's voice lifted through that process, we're looking forward to, and I believe they're looking forward to as well, because that was part of the ask, that was part of the communication. So other questions?
Yeah, I have one other question on the second goal measurement. I think it's on slide 5, development of an equity subcommittee or a new committee to establish a plan to eliminate anti-Black racism and white supremacy. Can you share a little bit more about where that is?
Yeah, so what we've done with that is ultimately we brought that to our equity team, and maybe I can ask Kelly to talk about that a little bit. Ultimately, in the conversation we've had, we've started to talk about that we almost have too many committees. We have our staff of color, we have our racial equity committee, we have, the DDEA equity committee. What we're talking about is, okay, how do we align these committees, and where do we come together to talk about the same work? Especially since, and this is some of the feedback we received from some of our staff that are on multiple committees, right? They're on 2, 3, 4 committees that's going down the same path, which one, that's very exciting. That's exciting that's what's happening, but it also could cause room for confusion. So our intention was to basically go through our equity committee when it comes to that specific target, and not look at, I think I've given an update to the board a couple times about that, in which we've talked to the equity committees that, do we think we want a separate committee? Do we want to do it within this committee itself through the equity plan? And that's where we've landed. I know actually Dawn is on the equity committee. I don't know if she remembers any of those conversations, wants to share, but I will ask Kelly to unmute and give a little feedback as well, just to add to what I explained.
I do believe that some of the components with regards to where it says establish a plan, that a lot of the discussion that comes around with whether it be professional development, what kind of instructional strategies are being used, culturally responsive teaching practices. And then when we're talking about whether it be discipline or system accountability, which I'll refer to when we get to the equity plan portion, is all embedded within the scope of setting up structures to eliminate racism and white supremacy. So for instance, I'll use the professional development component. Through members of the SOC on these various committees, we are discussing like what are the components within the PD that we want to ensure that everybody has a common understanding, a common foundation, i.e. microaggressions, implicit bias, stereotypes. What is the foundation of the context that we want to build? Knowing that once an employee is working, whether it be in a department or a school level, those local situations, they might be expanding on different areas with regards to the overarching equity plan. But specific to anti-Black racism and white supremacy, that plan needs to be able to encompass all the different components within the district in order for that to happen.
Thank you, Kelly. So ultimately, we're embedding the work, Andrea, and that was after a conversation with the equity committee specifically and some of the feedback. But if that's a change from kind of what that says in wording, and if the board thinks, no, we want a separate committee, and that's the direction that the board truly wants to see, we will make that happen. Again, we ultimately decided to embed it within the actual racial equity committee we have, and basically ensure that our work was focused on that. But like I said, if that's not what the board had envisioned, because that came out of obviously a resolution, ultimately kind of the direction of, and I do think the resolution evolved a little bit, did talk about the equity committee as well, but I think it ultimately landed on the superintendent shall, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if there's a reason or an interest that we have a separate committee specifically around that, we will do that. But like I said, what we would do is take some of that work that we're doing and embed it. I mean, it's the same work, I guess, is ultimately what we're doing.
Yeah, I don't necessarily, I don't think that a separate committee is necessary. I think based on what I can remember in drafting that resolution, the intent there was to have a group of folks, and I think there were specific stakeholders identified as part of that committee, which to your point also overlapped with the participants of the Racial Equity Committee, to come together and do the work. That was over the summer, and based on what you all are saying, it sounds like there hasn't been a deeper conversation on the actual development of the plan, which I think is the crux of the intent, right, is to actually work on that plan. But it sounds like perhaps that'll be a subsection in the racial equity plan, which I think is also fine. So I don't necessarily think that it matters too much who or how the table is set. I think for me, and others, board members, feel free to chime in, the intent was to make sure that the table is moving forward and beginning to develop the plan, and to be intentional about beginning to look at anti-Black racism and ensuring that the to Kelly's point, some of those particular areas are beginning to have a better comprehensive approach in how we're deconstructing and ultimately embedding equity.
Yeah, that sounds great, Andrea. And you're absolutely right. Over the summer, and I believe I sent communication that what we were waiting for is when we had our first equity racial equity committee, because what we wanted to do is bring this to them and talk about a separate committee, another committee, which we did, had that conversation. And then from there, the equity committee has been working. So I don't want to imply that there hasn't been work specifically, because there have. Again, some of those conversation planning groups, I know Kelly and Andy and Donna, I think, are on a group together and have met a couple times. So there's definitely been work. And I just, Kelly and I have had the opportunity to talk and connect. And one of the things we talked about is our next all equity team is to resurface that and really talk about, when we're talking about an equity plan and racial equity, that one of the asks from the board of this committee, or separate, or however we continue, is truly around that anti-Black racism, and continue to lift that through the process, because there might be something we're doing for a number of reasons, and one of them is that there might be something we're doing specifically for one item or another, but that's definitely, we will continue to have that conversation with our equity committee as well. So I'm going to keep us moving here. I have a feeling the 2 hours are going to go fast, but please, other questions, or because we can always circle back around and continue to have conversations. So this next goal, Derek, if you go to the next one, yep, you already did it, great. And the goal statement around this is improve student achievement with an emphasis on our growth model in all areas measured by Oregon State Report Card, with an intentional focus to close the opportunity and achievement gap, and looking at our results. This one, unfortunately, we set goal measures related to our state assessment, which student achievement is what we do. So having these targets, I think, is the right measurement tool to talk about student achievement. There are other measurement tools as well. But unfortunately, Derek, if you go to the next slide, the very first thing I can report is that you can see it there in bold. It says assessment and accountability. The Oregon State Assessment System, state testing, and academic accounting measures are basically waived this year. We will not have state tests. The reason I'm highlighting that doesn't mean it eliminates the work and can share the work, but ultimately the measurements that we have here, these three measurements, we won't have, other than the graduation rates. Year over year, right? We'll be able to look at the graduation rates. But as far as the number 1 and 2, those are specifically rated to assessments. This graduation rate, although again, I'll show you the last year's graduation rate, and then this year's, we'll get that. Really, this goal is looking at this year's over last year's, which won't be till the end of the year. But either way, that target year over year is something that we should be looking at and aspiring to. So we can go back and kind of review that, and then we'll also look going forward. But with that said, as we look at, other than unfortunately those state assessments, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, with because of the needs of COVID, is we have had some specific work related to conversations we've had at the board level, district leadership level. The first one's related to sexuality education, that development of a DDS comprehensive sexuality education plan. Work this year includes focus groups, some examples: Latino Student Union, Black Student Union, LGBTQ plus students. We've also had some of our trusted adults in specific communities. And then ultimately that's continued work. And I can, when I'm done reviewing the slide, ask Brooke to unmute. So Brooke, if you can be ready for that. We've also looked at renewed teen pregnancy prevention grants, which is a multi-year grant along with the deliverables. And I won't go through each one of these bullets, but I'll slow down and pause so you can scan with them. But ultimately we'll be participating in the assessment and that process. Derek, if you want to go to the next slide. We also have been looking at the safety protocols for volunteers and obviously developing a system around that, updating and the consistent review during our CDL and before and beyond, including we've developed volunteer email accounts to help us streamline that process. Instructional materials specifically right now, this came out of the Freedom Dreams. The conversation was occurring before as well, but the collaboration with our Racial Equity Committee and DDEA Equity Committee to revise curriculum adoption process. So we know we might not be able to change every single curriculum right now today, although we can go through audits, we know that we can develop a process to ensure as curriculums come up, as we have the opportunity to purchase new curriculum and review, that there's a process in place that truly does have a cultural competent lens. One of the things we're looking at and developing is mandatory training on anti-racist and anti-bias lens for the adoption of committee members. So anyone that does volunteer to be a committee member, there'll be specific training around that as we look at curriculum. How do we look at that lens? How do we use a lens to ensure we're measuring curriculum with that tool? And then also review the process that incorporates training components specifically. Ultimately, the intention there is to make sure that as we bring on curriculum, we're asking the right questions, right? We're looking at it through the right lens. And then finally, the training for instructional assistants led by District Mentor Team. So with our MEST paraprofessional course and then IA Professional Learning Series are also things that we've done to implement and go improve this process. I think there's some questions in the chat I'm going to look at, but while I look at those, Brooke, do you want to unmute and spend a little bit of time on the sexuality education and anything else that you want to discuss in this review?
Sure. Yeah. So eventually we will bring this to you. So we have a committee coming together, and it's a K-12 committee that's working on our comprehensive sexuality education plan. And we started this work last year, and it got halted again because of COVID. But we're picking it up again this year, and we're in the process. It includes multiple components of it, the curriculum just being one piece. But right now we're in the process of wanting to get feedback to inform our plan. So we're in the process of running multiple focus groups, as was mentioned. That's really exciting. The team's gone through a focus group training. We're partnering with Multnomah County Health, and they're working with us on this, as well as SEI has been represented in the group as well, and that's exciting. So right now we've done all of those student focus groups that are listed, and I don't know, Derek, if you want to go back to that slide. We've done all the student focus groups, and we've done most of the trusted adult focus groups, and we're in the process of taking that data and coding it and looking for themes and things that will then say, okay, now that we have this information, how does this inform our plan? And the plan, again, could be, curriculum. It could be, what's offered, what's not offered, students feeling included, where they go for help. There's lots of different moving components, but when that is complete, we will definitely be bringing it to you to share. I don't know if there's any questions about that.
Well, either if there's any questions, let us know, but I will just acknowledge in the chat, in case those who might be streaming that don't see it, is that there was a suggestion that the Racial Equity Committee has already met twice in January. That's accurate, but ultimately maybe there should be a standing report at our board meeting, and our board chair, Chair Valderrama, communicated, yeah, that's a great idea. So that's something we can add to the agenda to have a more regular, consistent report on the work of our Racial Equity Committee.
I had a couple of things.
Yeah.
One, I wanted to just say quickly I thought about with the hiring, when we were talking about the hiring plans and now talking about the goals around culturally responsive instruction. And I'm wondering if also there's discussion of how we are in our hiring screening applicants for cultural competence. Is that something that is built into the hiring plan, especially when you're talking about the number of building level administrators that have to be hired for the coming year? Because as we are moving our faculty and staff along in terms of bias and all of these areas, every time we bring in new people, how are we ensuring that they're at least up as far as where our current staff is, if not beyond that? Because we can't necessarily trust and rely on the fact that all of the universities that are preparing people have done that work. So I'm wondering if there's something in the process that is specifically looking at that as we're bringing in new people. And then I have one other question, but I'll let you respond to that first.
You bet. Thanks, Donna. I saw Candy nod. I'm guessing she wants to unmute, so I'll let her go, and then I'll share a few other ideas. But you nailed it, Donna. You're right on point.
Yeah. So Donna, we have quite an extensive, what I'll call screening process prior to even bringing a candidate to the table, so to speak, which includes looking at all, their background, their skill set in working with diverse populations, and then also just doing all of those reference checks. And that's kind of our beginning stages once we get the applicants. But then a part of every interview, we include very specific questions around cultural competency, and even when it comes to, I would say, even licensed educators, but especially to all of our administrators that we hire, we have them do very specific tasks to show some of those skills and to show off their skill set in that area. So there's quite a lot actually that we do even beforehand and during the process. We even do some site visits, and there's just a lot you can glean from that as well. So that is definitely a part of our process.
Okay.
So Donna, we believe that the hiring is one of the most important things we do. And during the interview process, if we just use that term, the least reliable predictor in an interview process is a traditional interview, actual just question and answers. Although we do ask specific questions related to cultural competence, and we are definitely looking for an understanding there. To us, it's more about what they've demonstrated, what has their career been about, and that's where the reference check, as Candy said, we do reference checks before we ever even interview. We go through a process to kind of check, who is this person, what do they stand for, and I know that's not 100% accurate either, but that's the starting point. And then the visits in this year could be a little difficult with that, but the visits typically give us an opportunity to true them, see them, talk the talk, walk the walk, interact with kids, interact with staff, etc. And then finally, what Candy mentioned was demonstration. I'll give you one example. But so not only do we call them stations, but not only a traditional interview, we do have interview with questions specifically, but the other stations are activity based. So basically, we give them, for example, one thing we might do is give them a data set, a data set from a school that shows state assessments or shows data around discipline or shows true data, and basically ask them to navigate that, ask them to look for it. And obviously what we're looking for out of that is that there is a opportunity gap within our data, right? We have not perfected it. And as they come back and do a report to the one of the interview committees teams, we have 4 different teams going through this process, that's what we're looking for, that it's not just, oh, we did great, we increased our graduation rate, which is great, but why are our Black and brown students not graduating at the same rate as? So looking for that, asking those deeper questions, and how do we continue to move forward? Yes, we can celebrate. There's areas that we should celebrate, but there's also areas that we must get better at. So that might be one activity, and is an activity that we've used multiple times. As we set the table and as we try to learn who these candidates are. So that's just an example.
Okay, great, thank you. And then the other question, I guess, a real concern that just came up for me, and when you mentioned that understandably the state is not requiring the assessment and those normal state tests that would be our academic measures. However, then does that mean that there's no district assessments, any measures that we are doing to see how students are doing, or to verify their success or their learning, especially during this year when things have been so unusual and kids are at learning in these most challenging circumstances, what are we doing to inform us of who is most impacted, and to know how to address that? Have we only relied on the state testing and what the state has given back to us, or do we have some other measures in place that will inform us as to what we need to do to serve the kids this year?
I can take that if that's okay. Because we do have like the state assessments are summative measures, you know, along the way. So we always kind of call it like the autopsy, but we really need those screenings, you know, what is our screening data telling us, kind of like when you go to the doctor and they take your blood pressure and everything. So we do have screening measures in place. More so for our K-8 students. Some of them are transferring better to a digital environment than others. So we're having to change, but one of our biggest screeners, it's called DIBBLES, and it's a reading assessment. And we're looking at things like nonsense word fluency. And so teachers are trying to learn. I think we're getting better of trying to do small breakouts, because some of those are one-on-one assessments. So those are screening measures that we will give in the winter, and we will also give in the spring as well. And then we also have what's called reading inventory and math inventory measures. So those are still screeners, but we really ask our teachers to rely the most heavily on what's called formative assessments. Those are those, in-program assessments, our students learning what they're being taught, so that will inform your instruction. And that's not so that we're just marching our way through the curriculum, but we're really trying to be responsive based on the data that we're getting for our students. So that is the most effective measure, but we will have some data too for the screening data.
And is that all at the classroom level, or does it provide things that let you look across, like at the building level, and then even at the I guess when you say the elementary versus middle school, high school, to get broader pictures as well?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak kind of outside of CDL, because I do think it's an anomaly, but that's part of our response to instruction system that we have. So we typically do screening measures 3 times a year, in fall, winter, and spring. And then with those, when we get that data back, we have data team meetings that really inform, and we have those at the school level. So we have a structure and a system for data teams to happen. They're all having them at the same time. I'm speaking elementary right now. And then we could also come together and look at that same data across schools. We can look at it by grade level. So we're looking at making all those decisions and looking, how are we doing? And then how are we responding to that data? At the school level, they're really looking and seeing how are we responding to which students might need small group, which students might need some intervention support. So they're making student-based decisions, and then we're looking at that data to make programming decisions more so. So yeah.
So at this point, you said you do fall, winter, and spring. Have you already done fall and winter?
We did not do fall this year because of CDL, everybody coming in, starting on the computer, because again, some of these are one-on-one assessments with students, and we just weren't sure how to make it work. But we are going to be doing some winter screening. Yeah, so there's a winter screening, they're starting like this month.
And did we do spring last year?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe, let me go back and double check that, but I believe we did. Yeah, because we were in the doing the packet. So let me go back and double check.
Okay.
But in normal years we do. And we can show you what that data looks like if you're ever interested.
So I'm wondering, as we are, of course, always thinking about and making these decisions about reopening schools and all that, if this might be information that is also important for us to factor into those decisions, as will that give us some indication of the impact, the academic impact that is happening, and especially if it is broken out by the different groups that was on the chart that he just showed to us, we could have some idea of this year over last year, what the impact has been already on these different groups, and factor that into our decision making when we're deciding about the reopening of schools.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, we always want to say that we want to make data-driven decisions, and that is a great place for us to start, taking what is the data telling us, and then versus, all the other information that we're gathering about needs based on the family outreach that we're doing as well, to make those informed decisions. I agree.
So is there some summary that you could have for the board at a future meeting, so that we could include that in our decision making?
Absolutely. We're
Okay.
happy to share what we have.
All right. Thank you so much, Brooke.
Thank you, Brooke, and thank you, Donna, for the questions. That's I don't know if you noticed when you were asking the question, I was smiling because I knew, Brooke, this is just such a passion for hers and ours. But the reality is student achievement and being an RTI, response to intervention. We're proud to say we are an RTI district, MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, and ultimately being responsive to student needs. I know specifically you and I, Donna, have met and had conversation about the state summative tests, and what that really tells us is kind of questionable sometimes. Brooke brought that up. Really, those formative assessments are where it's at. How do we inform instruction? How do we inform what we're doing? And that last comment you made, I just want to echo on, because that is going to be essential as we are planning, not just for coming back, but when we come back. And I truly hope I can say when we come back this spring, that as students are back in our walls, how are we working with them and assessing what their needs are, right?
Yes,
how do
absolutely.
we do, and how do we finish the spring one, but then also open next fall, right? We know there's going to be different needs, and how do we assess that? What does that look like? And those are conversations we just started to have. But for the board to know, we've already had parents, asking, I'd like my student to do third grade again. I'd like my student to do, some of those conversations about redoing a grade, and, how are we going to respond to that? And it's going to need to be data informed, and what resources can we truly put in place to accelerate? It's usually not about slowing things down. It's how do we accelerate the learning to make sure students are caught up? So anyway, I think that's a whole nother workshop, which I would love to do at some point, but we will bring back information, at least in the board meeting, Donna, but us communicating RTI and what we do and what those data teams look like in the meeting and all of those things. But with that said, I'm going to jump forward and keep moving unless there's other questions. Looks like Sahar's grabbing water, which is great. So the next goal specifically is around communication and engagement. And Derek, you've already gone forward. Yes. So in this one, really focusing on our creating venues and communication strategies for all stakeholders. We want all students to be engaged, all stakeholders to be engaged, including students. Student voice is so important to me, to our team, to our district, I know to our board. And the reality is engagement of our community is so essential as well. I truly believe that education is a partnership, and we have some expertise in education. So do our parents and families, but our parents and families are definitely the experts of their children. So how do we partner together and get better at that every day is something that ultimately this goal is focused on. With that said, we specifically looked at data that we received through the Youth Truth surveys, which we have been engaged in, and some of the data started to come back in. We don't have it right now to report, but there's a lot that we'll be able to share, and you can see each one of these is our hope is that we'll be increasing our positivity rating. We'll be increasing kind of the perception of our families and what we're doing, how we're doing it. I can tell you unofficially, definitely received a lot of positive feedback at the beginning of this year. It's kind of interesting and ironic, and I think I shared that earlier in my presentation or a previous board meeting, that you'd think, on one hand, we've never been more disconnected On the other hand, we're also getting feedback that we've never been as connected, right? Because some of these meetings and opportunities to connect with families and the intentional reach out and what's happening in the classroom. So it's a real interesting yin and yang, I guess, because some of the feedback we've gotten from families is thank you for all of the communication and the connections and the intentionality of how we're doing things. And we hope that this will continue as we transition. So with that said, Derek, if you want to transition, next slide. You can see in the next slide, kind of, again, just an overall general report where we're at, some of the things we're doing. As I said, third year, we've partnered with Youth Truth, gather input. And again, the great thing about that is, one, it is a national survey. We actually had a workshop with them this morning with the entire admin team, how we read data and use the survey and disaggregate what's coming in. But in that, I believe they shared they have over 2 million responses nationwide. So we can really norm it across the nation. And then I apologize, I forget how many within the state of Oregon, but just the state of Oregon itself, there's a number of districts that use Youth Truth. So we could also look at that, compare and contrast with other districts to kind of see how we're doing. On top of that, looking at that focus, ultimately you could see the survey focused on areas of DEI, learning during COVID, engagement, relationships, school culture, communication, school resources, and school safety. A few other things you'll notice is Family Cafe, beginning February 4th, we're instituting, which is an opportunity to partner with our families in learning together and sharing ways to support our students' educational successes. Down below, you can see Together Strong parent gatherings, which have been facilitated by Family and Community Partnership coordinators, IDA. Many of you know IDA. You can see some of them have already been completed, others are ongoing. But what's really excited about that is the agendas typically developed by the parents, right? Ultimately, the parents are the voices in the agenda and developing the process. Next slide, Derek. So kind of just continuing on, as you know, it's been a while now, but very proud of the work that we've done, and we started at the beginning of this year around our general sessions that we hosted for our families to talk about CDL, to talk about the information that was coming at us, to share with families where we're at, all of the work that our buildings did to host those type of meetings, all the work that our teachers did to host those type of meetings, and ultimately to share what we have, share resources, share our learning, and again, partner in education. And then finally, some ongoing tools, support tools, did set up support around teacher view, parent view, trying to get more parents engaged in that, to use that as a tool. School messenger, phone calls, text messages, we still use. The elementary report card, we're aligning to CDL. Report card should be a communication tool, a tool to help parents understand where their students at in education. So really aligning it to the learning. Obviously the Zoom meetings, what we're doing there, using Google Translate, we translate all documents that go out from our district, and then Google Meets and the training related to that. And I will stop there because that's just a snapshot of some of the communication, and we're starting to run short on time, but I'm going to pause and ask any questions, any meals. What does grab and go? Yeah, so the grab and go is the meals. So we currently are lunch. I'm sorry, just mute. But it's the meals. That is correct, Aaron. Thank you for answering that. Other questions? We do not. So the next question, Andrea, we do not have that data all back yet. The Youth Truth is currently processing for it, so we don't have it yet. We don't have it in front of us yet.
Oh, I was thinking Family Cafe. You said there's learning opportunities that are grab and go. Does that mean that there's just educational material in the lunches? Is that what that means? On the Family Cafe. Sorry, it's not a huge deal. I was just curious.
Oh, you mean? Oh, I'm sorry. My slide just froze, so I'm trying to get back to that slide.
Yeah, no worries.
I apologize. Yeah, okay. I thought you meant what is grab and go as far as food and grab and go, but And my screen just froze, so give me a minute here. Apologize. Okay.
Derek, can you go to the previous slide? I think that's where it's at. Okay.
Yeah, it's on.
Yeah, there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea is that actually the grab and go is the lunch, Aaron, exactly. Sorry, everything's working now again. So, and the opportunity, right, for quick connections. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Ken, I was wondering who is responsible for the official social media channels for David Douglas, doing engagement with our families and communities via social media platforms.
Yeah, the lead division that takes that is our communication divisions. So Dan McHugh. So he monitors, posts, works on the Facebook page along with his staff. Our principals and office secretaries, when it comes to site school level, they also manage their web page, and some have Facebook kind of or Facebook pages as well. But the district one is Dan McHugh. Other questions? Okay, so we'll jump to the executive leadership goal, and this one's really getting into the plans. So we'll be able to go a little deeper in some of the plans that we talked about. But the executive leadership, Derek, you've already, yes, is lead, manage, evaluate all systems infrastructure with the David Douglas School District to make positive changes. And ultimately the focus on this goal this year is completion and implementation of the district's strategic plan. We're going to update completion and implementation of our long-range facilities plan, and then finally completion and implementation of our COVID health and safety school return plans. So next slide, Derek. And the first one is long-range facilities plan. Pat, I don't know if you want to unmute and share a bit about that.
So DLR Group did our long-range facilities plan as well as our high school master plan. The master plan is currently being finalized. The facilities plan you saw back in December, that was approved by the state. And just a reminder, our awesome grant was approved for May 2021. We do need to reapply for November. They did confirm that. And we had done community workshops all the way back starting. We actually started this right as COVID started. So things got delayed a little bit to the fall, and we had several community members that helped out and worked with the committee and did some touring in the summer and helped us develop the plan.
Thank you, Pat. And I know many of our board members were involved in that process, so it's probably pretty fresh, but those have been completed moving forward. And then the next slide, Derek, is specifically our update to the COVID health and safety plan. Again, just an update of where we're at, snapshot. You guys know as a board that we do have MOUs completed for our CDL. We are fully engaged in CDL. We're working through CDL. You also know we received a demand to bargain, and we have been in conversations, very collaborative, positive conversations with both the union leaderships. Tomorrow we have our first bargaining session to discuss the return. So I haven't seen exactly what that looks like. I'll be communicating with the board, but we are going to be engaging in that process ultimately to develop an understanding of March 29th if we meet the all the safety requirements, if vaccines are in place, et cetera, what does the return look like? And then finally, our SSL committees. So it's kind of interesting because a lot of this work, the blueprints, we've already submitted. But as you know, it's been a moving target, changing target. And on January 19th, we got the latest update. So met with our administrative team this morning. We went through that new information. Still a lot to unpack, a lot to do. But ultimately, each building is going to have an RSSL committee. It's going to be working on those new requirements and understandings so we can resubmit our blueprints meeting the new guidelines with a focus on hybrid. In that hybrid specifically, we're focusing on pre-K through grade 3. And the possibility it might be a transition. We might be looking at pre-K1, pre-K2, and then kind of rolling out as the guidance suggests. But the hybrid's really focused at the elementary, and then middle and high is focused on LIPI, which is limited in-person instruction. So that's the direction we're going right now in our hopes of reopening the 29th. Side note, a lot's coming out as fast and furious about the vaccination process, and we are at the table with our MESD, with our Multnomah County partners and our hospital organizations. In Multnomah County, our hospitals leads are the ones who are getting the vaccines and ultimately driving this, but they're doing it with our input. And we are still looking to stand up a mass vaccine site at the convention center. We're still targeting the possibility of that occurring January 25th, which is next week. Actually just had communication today. We have a meeting tomorrow about this, and 2 meetings tomorrow, one at 1 and one at 4:30, to kind of hopefully bring the finalize and what does that look like. The big question really is how much vaccine will we get and what's available. So that's what we're currently navigating is what do we have? And if we don't have enough, then they're looking at what's called sequencing. We're looking at, if there's not enough for everyone, how do we sequence who we vaccinate in what order? So those are all continuing conversations. Going to jump to our equity plan. And Derek, if you'll go 2 slides, and I'm going to ask Kelly to unmute and share some of the great work that's progressing on our equity plan.
Okay. So what you see in front of you on the slide is just a quick summary screen that we are hopefully able to articulate in a snippet what our racial equity committee has completed so far. So adopted the actual racial equity policy in January of 2020. And then the equity plan comes within the policy. And so our equity plan work has started. And what our focus is on the 4 commitment areas that was articulated and directed in the actual policy. So commitment number 1 is student achievement. Commitment 2, student discipline. 3, systems accountability. And 4, workforce policies. And as you read through our racial equity policy, there's actually 13 focus areas. So all of the 13 focus areas have been thus divided under each of the commitment areas. And our school board committee has actually split up into 4 working breakout groups. So in the course of, I would say, the end of November through December and currently in January, we are all working on our first draft templates of what would be our action steps. What are we going to propose to the larger committee that would then encompass the equity plan in its entirety? I do want to make note that when we are reflecting on some of the multiple or overlapping groups that we have that are working on our advancing equity efforts throughout the district, our commitments are also connected to some of the staff of color freedom dreams. It is connected to some of the work that we have been discussing with our DDA equity committee, and in our current work with the boards and administration's strategic plan. You will see the connections to elevating racial equity as well when we talk about our strategic plan. But with regards to the Freedom Dreams, Freedom Dream number 1, which is talking about advancing culturally responsive curriculum, comes under commitment number 1, student achievement. And Freedom Dream 2, professional development, and Freedom Dream 3, hiring a diverse workforce, comes under workforce policies. Our work with our federal restorative practices grants is directly connected under the student discipline commitment. Ken often talks and reiterates with us that when equity in David Douglas doesn't just live in the equity department, equity is encompassed in every department, in every school. So when we have broken out into these 4 commitment groups, each member of cabinet has been involved in the various commitment groups for some continuity and some crossover, along with Donna and Christine and members of the staff of color group as well. And what you'll notice is that we have done our best effort in regards to trying to backwards plan. The committee's goal is to get a draft in front of the school board prior to June for approval. And we know that when we backwards plan, we have to get an initial draft to you. I probably have to change that. It's probably by April. For first reading in order to get full approval by the end of the June board meeting. So Derek, if you can advance to the next slide, please. So again, here are the 4 commitments. Again, it's articulated and defined right out of our racial equity policy. So these are the umbrellas of the different work groups that we are working on. We're currently working on our action steps right now. I think some of our groups have met for a minimum of two or 3 times. Some of our breakout groups have met in like about 6 times, working on the different action steps and the rich discussions that we're having in order to create our action steps to present to the school board. Let's see. Donna or Christine, I don't know if you want to add anything, or if Ken, I have forgotten anything in the update. I have 2 slides. I can answer questions before we move on to the strategic plan, which again, you will see a layer of diversity, equity, and inclusion embedded within the strategic plan update. So questions or additional comments from either Donna or Christine, who are representatives on our committee, or from Ken that I forgot?
I do not have any questions and nothing more to add other than an amazing team doing amazing work. And again, this is meant as a snapshot and update. The target is the end of the year that we have a equity plan, and I truly believe we will have an equity plan. And again, a lot of this work, you're going to see the last few slides, we're going to focus on supports after we talk about strategic plan that were implemented, and really looking at, as Kelly said, the strategic plan. It's just so clear and so exciting that as we met with our community, their voices around equity came out loud and clear, and our pillars really represent that, I believe. But again, I don't see any other questions. I do want to apologize just in case someone's listening. It sounds like I said January 29th as a target date to return to schools. That was an error, and I apologize. It's March 29th. Last board meeting, our board took action to keep our district in CDL, comprehensive distance learning, until the week after spring break. So again, that does not mean we will for sure come back, but what we're planning for and targeting is Monday of March 29th. Obviously, there's a lot of conditions that will need to be met in our county around the safety measures. And then as a district, we will have our safety measures in place. So anyway, with that said, if there's not other questions related to that, it's exciting work. We're going to transition to the strategic plan. Derek's already 1 slide ahead. Awesome. Derek, can you go to the next slide? And as with the last equity committee, we have board representation on our strategic plan. We also have had board representation. Sahar has been at many of the meetings. Aaron's been at many of the meetings, so please don't hesitate to weigh in. And then Andrea also has been attending as well as representatives from the board. But ultimately, as an update, we did go through the process, gather information, and next couple slides, I'll show you kind of all the different avenues we've done that. We actually reported on this to the board. So this is really a snapshot just to remind the board that where our community and input landed on is 4 specific pillars. Those pillars are diversity, equity, inclusion, communication, family engagement, safety and well-being, and highly effective teaching. And ultimately, where we're at in that process is we are finalizing, we're really just polishing, so that each committee put together and the statements, the equity statements, they put together the actions, and some of them put together even due dates and who would lead those actions, but they didn't get to all of that. So where we're at right now is putting those final steps on the due dates for the next few years and when we will complete these actions, and then who's leading that work. So you'll know as a board who's responsible for that work and how we're going through that process. Derek, if you want to go to the next slide. You can see here again just a little bit around the group, how they help work and guide us, the consultants, and specific focus groups that we included in the process. Actually, we will be finalizing the documents, the 4 different pillar documents, and we'll be handing them over to our consultant group tomorrow. So our hope is that we will be able to bring a final draft for one last look to the board to the February board meeting. That's our target. That's our hope, that we'll be bringing our strategic plan for the board to review at our February board meeting. And the last slide related to strategic plan, Derek, next slide. We're not going to go to these, but in your packet, obviously these are all links that go to the 4 different buckets or pillars that show the work, show what our committees, what our community shared with us, and ultimately where we've landed for our strategic plan as we move forward. So I will pause there now and just give a brief minute. Any questions, or Sahar, Aaron, Andrea, in this work, anything you'd like to add based on your involvement?
I mean, no, we've discussed it before at board meetings, and I think even Frida had brought it up when we were discussing bonds. It's just been, an odd situation discussing the bigger strategic plan or buildings and things like that in the kind of climate we're in and environment we're in. But yeah, so it's just been weird, to say the least, to be discussing these things. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'll also just add, I've really appreciated the engagement with the community, as Ken was mentioning. I think that, part of this has been really making sure that we get good, thorough participation and commitment to each of these items. And I think based on what I've been reading, I think it's in the middle of a pandemic, right? Just a lot, and we're asking a lot of folks. But I think it's been going. I've been appreciative of the process, given that it's been something we've been wanting to do for a long time. And I think really moving forward has been just exciting.
Yeah, I totally agree with both Sahar and Andrea. Yes, it's been weird in the current climate, but I do really appreciate the amount of community engagement we have had, and how many people are helping out and kicking in, and just getting to know people better and learn what they really want from their schools. So it's been a really cool process, and I appreciate being a part of it.
Thank you all. So the next, I'm going to pause here. It's 7:30, and I just want to recognize where we're at. technically that's the 4 goals. That's the update around the 4 goals conversation. Obviously, there's some homework we have, questions we have, but I do want to make one last statement, and it's somewhat related to what Andrea just said. In the current climate, with the pandemic, with a lot of other community events, with a lot of other traumatic things that have happened in our society, our world, everything involved, I do want to share that. Again, I'm very excited about the work and the progress. There's always room to grow, get better. You know, you'll always hear that from me. But I do appreciate, and I just want to reach out and say thank you, because a lot of this work, and this is really the tip of the iceberg on some of the reporting, to be quite honest. We had to limit some of what we shared just because we'd be here for hours and hours. But I just want to say thank you to our leadership team, administrative team, our cabinet, the hours, the work, the dedication to our district, and then really our teachers, what they're doing every single day to reach out to kids, develop lessons, and talk about we're doing things differently. You know, every single teacher is a first-year teacher this year. Every single principal is a first-year principal this year. And you know, every board member knows my style. I don't like to focus on negative, but I will say that that it's wearing thin. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of individuals that are putting in a tremendous amount. And when you are putting all of that out to get it back, is important, right? Filling that bucket. And I guess I just want to recognize and say thank you to our staff, to our leadership teams, for all they're working and all they're doing, because it is supporting and making a difference for kids every day. But anyway, with that said, it has been a different year, definitely. That's probably a nice way to say it. So with that said, our next step, you guys, is we have a handful of slides here, and I'm going to ask everyone to be pretty brief on these. A lot of this is a report, but over the last couple of board meetings, we've heard specific questions and conversations, and really an intentional focus from our board leadership, which I want to say thank you about, was that, what are we doing to support our families? And, when we started CDL, it was very directed from the board and specific that we need to be reaching out to our families. We need to be supporting them in this time of need. And if our schools are, if we're serving students through CDL, how are we ensuring we're reaching out and serving their families through CDL as well? And our last board meeting, that was specific as well. So what we have here as kind of the final few slides is just a quick update, and some of them we've already talked about, so I'm going to go fairly quick, and other ones we'll slow down on. But ultimately, I wanted to give a snapshot of that, some of that work, some of that extra work, some of the things we are doing to try to support our community as we are still in CDL, and we will be up until spring break at a minimum. These are some snapshot of some resources that our families will and are getting. So Derek, next slide. So again, around services and attendance support, Andy, I don't know if you want to quickly share a bit about this.
Yeah, I can share that, Ken. At the beginning of the year, we asked all of our teachers, as many of you board members that are parents know, that we asked them to call their families at the beginning of the year for the purpose of supporting them. And you're going to see in some slides coming, they ask questions around technology, internet, food, housing, insecurities. And so as we planned this, it was kind of really a cool project, because we thought, how are we going to keep track of all this information so we can truly support families, so nobody, falls through the cracks? And through a great partnership with Derek's team and Kel's team, we pulled off a way to build this into Synergy, our student information system. And then we were able to cascade that information to our schools and our principals, who kind of rearranged their teaming structure to what they had, to what we call building support teams. And now they're some meeting weekly, some every 2 weeks, for the purpose of supporting students in not just academics, but in technology, in housing, in food. It's been something really unique to CDL that I think has been a real point of pride for our schools this year.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. Next slide. And I'm going to kind of quickly skip this slide, although I know I could hand it over to Derek, and I want to thank Derek and his team for all they've done. But we've reported on this multiple times. So, but it's obviously all the work that we're doing around technology in CDL. It would not work without technology. So his team has just been phenomenal through this entire process. But I'm going to ask to go to the next slide, Derek. And the next about 3 slides, I'm going to ask Brooke to kind of walk us through. Although, Brooke, I don't think we can focus on quite every bullet. Maybe if you could just give a highlight, because there are 3 slides about all the different opportunities and instructional support we're providing.
Sure, yeah. So this first slide just represents some universal supports that we have in place, like, across all of our schools. So, I think the biggest thing that we really wanted to ensure with distance learning is accessibility for help and support. So if a student or a family needs to call, that they have that connection. And so having daily teacher office hours, which is just open time for teachers, and students are taking advantage that families can call. So really building that into our schedule. Also, we are recording our class sessions because one of the benefits of distance learning is maybe I can watch it at a later time. My situation may not be that I could attend that 9 o'clock class, but I could watch it at 8 p.m. at night. So that students have an opportunity to go back and view the material. And that is also woven into our attendance reporting that Andy was talking about, because then we can still say, yeah, they may have been absent, but they're still engaged in the learning by going back and accessing the learning. Or if I just need to review, I was in class, but I need to go back and watch part of it again. As you guys know, digital curriculum and distance learning has been important. So a lot of the digital curriculums across the grade levels, they just have those built-in features that support students, such as read aloud. Teachers can change reading levels, built-in video tutorials, etc. Schools are doing an amazing job with not only materials distribution, because we know everything can't be on the computer, but also just giving supplies. They've gotten donations. They're doing a lot of supply distributions as well. And of course, we're doing library checkouts. We figure that's very important. The library we see as the hub to the school. So still getting those physical books in the hands of students. But Multnomah County Library, all of our students in David Douglas with a partnership have a card and access to Multnomah County Library. And we keep trying to promote this, but they do a fantastic job with that live homework help, where they actually have some live tutors that you can get in and that students can access. So Derek, if you go to the next slide. So these are just additional, and I'm just going to read a few, but reaching out to schools, because we know schools are doing so much above and beyond to support their families. So really tuning into the social needs of the students as well. Lots of homework help, lots of, just support there, but also doing lunch bunches and recesses and clubs for students to really get that social connection, because we know that this is all interwoven. And I think getting into a routine of how they can communicate with family. I was sent photos, and I can share that with you, from Cherry Park, of these beautiful visual bulletin boards that they are sharing with their students, so that not only, here's all the materials you need for the week, but it's the visual of their week that really helps set them up for success, that they share with families and students. And again, teachers are giving their personal cell phone numbers to families, like call us anytime, which is great. And then Derek, next slide. And then at the high school in Fur Ridge, again, Scott Center, which is a individualized support. They also have their advisory and their office hours, but they also have Scott Centers. And that's a place where students can get help. Math tutoring, you need help editing a paper, you need a college application. There's lots of supports. And so they kept those supports in place for students. They're still doing family nights to support, again, a lot of those social aspects that are happening. Fur Ridge talked about having mentors go into classes to help students. And they have, again, those student success teams that all of our schools have, where they really talk about individualized supports to students. And you can see academics, attendance, drug and alcohol counseling, teen parent support. So really look at the individual students and then do outreach to ensure that they're feeling supported. And then we can, that next slide. And there's
Yeah, so
more,
the
but I
next-
thought 3 slides was plenty.
Yeah, you're perfect, Brooke. The next slide is food support. And again, this one I'm also going to quickly go through because we have reported on this multiple times, but our food service department has been amazing and going above and beyond to ensure that breakfast, lunch, and dinner has also been served. And the reality that the pickup sites, how we're doing that, is been a great, I believe, opportunity for our families, and we're continuing it. We're going to continue through spring break feeding our families, and it's essential, and our food service department has done an amazing job in partnership with our transportation department. You might notice as you're driving through our community or interacting in our community during about the lunch hour, you see buses at many of these sites with our transportation department and some food service with meals in their buses distributing them. I've shared this with a number of board members, but it's so fun and brings a smile to my face every time when my office obviously has a view of the parking lot, and the front northwest corner of the parking lot is where the bus parks and distributes lunches. Anyway, every day you can mark your clock to it. There's a group of students that come riding in on their bikes, and they always zigzag through the parking lot. It looks like they're playing follow the leader, and end up just parking right in front of the bus, putting their kickstands out and grabbing their breakfast and lunch. So it's really fun to see. But with that said, next slide, please, Derek. And Pat, or not Pat, excuse me, Mary's gonna jump in and share a little bit about some of our mental health supports.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I really want to highlight here, you can see that we do have partnerships with Multnomah County Mental Health and Trillium Family Services. Mainly those are our 2 mental health providers that are available in our schools. We also have resources at our Multnomah County school-based health clinics. So we have a health clinic at the high school. And they provide, sort of short-term mental health support, but also referrals into the community. I do really want to focus and highlight our counselors. Our counselors are really stars in all of this. They're doing an amazing, amazing job. They are just the coordinators, reaching out, finding out who needs what. No matter what it is, they are often those people that are trying to connect mental health supports, food, any kind of resources. If you have an opportunity to go to one of our web pages, you'll see that our counselors have created what they're calling Counselor Corners, which is a web page on their school web page that is just full of resources and social emotional lessons and just ways that you can reach them. And so they're just doing such an amazing job. So I really wanted to highlight that. You can see that also anytime we get resources from the community around food, healthcare, COVID-related things, mental health supports, we put that on our district website, but we also push it out to our counselors, and they're really active in sharing that information with our community. And next slide, Derek, I believe is mine as well. This is not mine.
It's Candy's. Candy, you want to share a bit around some of our staff for support?
Okay.
Sorry about that. My my unmute wasn't working. Yes, I do. And I won't go over every single bulleted item here, but I think we just wanted to share a little bit of the support that we're giving to our staff, because not only have their entire professional worlds turned upside down since this pandemic started, but they're seeing and caring for our children every day as well, along with their own families and children at home. And so we just wanted to share with you some of the things that that they've had access to help support them. So not only various leaves that you can see there, everything that was required from what we're calling the FFCRA Act, but then even when that expired, we are continuing to offer some of those opportunities for our staff to continue to support them. We have engaged in the work share program, so anyone we have needed to furlough as a result, there was a time where they were receiving $600 stipend per week if they were being furloughed, no more than 40%. And then also now we're looking into a $300 a week stipend. And that's evolving right now because the $600 one ended. We've also continued paying out just some of our contractual stipends, allowing our staff to work from home is a game changer for sure. We've given sub coverage by our own employees to the greatest extent possible. We've continued our employee assistance program. So it's a program that we've shared with you before that offers counseling to staff, and it's free up to 3 sessions at this point for those who need it. We've continued a robust district wellness program where there's reps at every building, and they still are trying to stay upbeat and have some fun challenges and engage our staff that way. We also, our HR team did an amazing job with our flu shot clinic, which we usually house every year in person up in the district office, but this time it was a drive-through, and it was really well received and really well organized and well done. And then lastly, we did allow our employees to change their medical benefits if needed due to a loss, a job loss within the family. Usually that period of time, there's one period of time called open enrollment where they get to do that, and we reopened it so folks could change that and add dependents as needed. And then I think just the biggest thing to share, and mostly because I'm super proud of our HR department, is the individualized meetings. So really our HR department has been there through thick and thin, and they just support with grace and care and sensitivity, and they've done that ever since this happened. And whenever someone has a question, they're there for them, try to kind of ease their anxiety a bit, but they get a whole lot of those really tough questions and tough scenarios, and they just handle it so beautifully. And so all of what you see here is really a direct result of their hard work and care of our staff, which is super important, because what we know is when our staff is cared for, our students are cared for, and that's really a big message here. And that's it for mine.
Thanks, Candy. I think the next slide is specifically around our community partners, and Kelly's going to share a little bit.
So stay tuned, because we have a official Sun presentation coming up at our next school board meeting, but just some small highlights. Andy mentioned our building support teams, and we made sure that our Sun managers are working side by side with our counselors in the school level team in order to utilize the resources and outreach that they have as well with families. Currently with Sun, a lot of our focus has been around wraparound services. They will share more with you at their presentation, but already, as Brooke alluded to, they are beginning to plan for possibilities of more online enrichment or online clubs starting in the spring. And then at the middle, at a school in the high school, you can see some of our partners listed where they have already begun to do online programming. Some of it is doing things that are targeting balancing mental health for our older students, and just really trying to provide some instructional supports through the course of the day when they're not in synchronous learning. Next slide, Derek. And then just a reminder to all that as many times as we can, we are sharing these resources either via social media if they're events, and we have a full family support page with regards to COVID on our websites, and we continue to update that through all of our departments, with our communications department taking the lead on spearheading direct resources to our community. Next slide.
The next slide's Mary, but I'm going to pause here, Mary, and just want to make sure because it is 7:47. We do have 1, 2, 3, 4 more slides, 4-ish more slides. But I wanted to check. We have 2 options. One is we will go through each of those slides. One is talking about medical support, housing support, childcare support, and then native language support. Those are the main slides left. Or I do want to make sure that there's time as we kind of wrap up. Typically, I know, Andrea, the workshops, we try to have the stop at 8 be at 8. So I just want to, the other thing we could do is basically, I want to make sure there's time for questions, any conversations, any follow-up the board would like to see. So I just kind of want to bring that to the table. Otherwise, we will keep going and we'll probably be done with the slides right at 8. But I wanted to make sure I just recognized allowing some time for questions.
I have one question. Just one that this is wonderful. And I just want to commend everybody for the work that you're doing in all of these areas is very commendable and excellent. My question is a question I ask all the time is, how do people know about all the resources that are available? There are things that should be of great help to a lot of people. And especially I'm thinking of some of the letters that we get as a board from different parents and people sharing about, even with all of this, how they are struggling. And I'm wondering, how are people knowing what is available to them? And is there any kind of response when there is a letter that comes into any of the board or to the district to reach out to that parent or family to say, hey, how can we help? Did you know we have XYZ?
Yeah. Great question. And each one of us could probably share a little bit, Donna, there. For example, some of the CBOs and how they communicate. Mary could get in and talk about our homeless and how we communicate and help. But ultimately, I'm going to ask one of your last questions first and then answer a few. So the first is, if anytime that a board member forwards a letter to me or an email to me and it has an ask, we do follow up and we connect with that. And if it's specifically a need and a concern, then we will share, whatever resources they have. Many times, if it comes to me, I'll actually share or connect them with Mary or connect them with Dan or connect it, right? We kind of just connect the dots where it's needed. So definitely anytime you forward anything to us, we follow through and connect. And or when we receive emails to our generic email, we have a David Douglas email. We respond to those if there's asks for help, and we try to partner and recognize. It is on our webpage. It is called out in our Facebook page from time to time. We'll circle back around about resources and re-lift up where they can find these resources and partnerships. There's also communication in newsletters from families. Also the same thing. Not every newsletters about that, but we kind of lift up at different times in communicating to our families about resources. Ultimately, the best place right now is on our webpage. We have basically 2 full pages full of resources, some that are ours, absolutely, others that are just resources we're sharing from the county, from the city, from the state. So those are the main ways that we reach out. Again, Kelly, Mary, anyone else want to? Yeah, I could tell Kelly wanted to.
Yeah. So one of the benefits or highlights that came out of what Andy originally shared about our CDL building support teams was that mechanism that we were able to was being underutilized, but we highlighted it during Synergy. So within Synergy, there's a family contact component. And what we were able to do was that when teachers were giving those initial phone calls, there was a way to mark targeted needs for a particular student or a particular family. The counselor has access to that. The the teacher has access to it. The SUN manager now has access to it, and the principal does. So when these building support teams are meeting together, they can pull up reports that will be able to show what was the response. And when they go by week to week, they can determine whether or not there has been follow-up, or there was an attempt for follow-up and we were unable to reach the family, even if it's just a phone call. So that's how some of the home visits or porch visits were then established. That's where a SUN site manager could then make sure that even though we have open community food pantries, they have been able to set aside food boxes for specific families because we have identified a need. So it's that ongoing wraparound communication that multiple key people within the building now have access to, and it can streamline it because it's all in one place versus everybody trying to keep record of their own spreadsheets with regards to a family. So hopefully that's helped answer your question as well. Mary and Andy, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
I think you said it very well. I was just going to say, it feels like when a community has sort of a crisis, for lack of a better word, they kind of come together, and it feels like that's what's happening in our community. There's a lot more touch points with families, and it's through all of those things that Kelly just outlined. I mean, it's just picking up the phone in ways that we probably didn't as much before, but all of the other touch points when families come to get food, when they come to get supplies, and it just feels like, and I think some of our youth truth data is showing this with students as well, that we're doing a better job just connecting and knowing what's going on with our families. And so I think it's kind of the old-fashioned way is what I would say.
That's awesome. Is there plans to continue the supports once distance learning ends? Not all of them maybe, but especially some of these key things, like you said, even just the communication piece. Are we planning to continue that, or is that just temporary?
It is not temporary. I think it's going to be needed just as much when we come back. And we know as we come back off of CDL, let's pretend that it does happen March 29th because all of the precursors fall in place. The reality is we are only going to have a certain population returning. We know there's going to be students and families choosing to stay in CDL, which we must provide and will provide. So based on all that, we are still going to need the communication channels and supports available for all of our families.
Okay. Is there anything that goes out with our initiation besides the website? Like, it sounds like it's a great response if somebody reaches out and says, hey, I'm struggling, or I have this need. But for those people who would not initiate, is there just like a general thing that goes out in some other way? You know, it could even be, since we're giving out lunches anyway, and that I would assume is going to some of our families with the greatest needs, that maybe there are postcards sometimes that are in those lunch bags that say, hey, did you know? And there's just a list of these things or something like that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, so great idea. And actually we've talked about that, and I don't know if it works, or if it happened yet, but if maybe Pat could share if she knows it did happen. But with that, I've also sent out a number of communications to our families, kind of just updates. And typically when I send those, not always, but a number of them we have sent and had a component in that shows here's the links, here's the resources, here's individuals you can call. So we have done some active reach out as far as communications. Some of the communications aren't even necessarily about that, but it's, well, we're sending a communication out. Why wouldn't we include these resources and have some of the links and connections? So, there's been a number of those that have gone out. Again, I know we talked about the postcard. Okay, Pat's checking. I don't know if it ever happened, but we did discuss that. Just putting in, here's some resources, here's some connections. And really what we're talking about right now, Donna, is at the site or district level, which is very important we do, but our sites, what we can do is get a list of all the different things our principals are communicating and reaching out, because typically every time we send something out, then they double resend it out and kind of reach out to their families as well and send out the resources and communities. So, yeah. If there's not other questions, we have about 3 minutes. I'm going to ask Mary if she will just quickly look at the housing support and the medical support, maybe those two, just because they're such an important topic. And we'll kind of pause and ask the board leadership what direction they want to go. So Mary, you want to share a bit?
Yeah, just briefly on the medical support, our health center, well, actually all of the health centers in Multnomah County are just an incredible resource right now to our communities. There's obviously David Douglas, Park Rose, Roosevelt in Portland Public, and then we just opened one at Reynolds. And so those are no cost for immunizations, vision, dental, mental health. There's also some supports through SEI around COVID screenings and Latino Network. And then just also, some of our CBOs that are providing culturally specific support around that. Next slide, Derek. As you guys know, we have a homeless liaison, our McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, and we have a liaison with that. And that's Florence, and she is very, very busy supporting families. Anybody that knows Florence knows she's moving all the time, and she's reaching out. I mean, it's really wherever we get information that a family might be doubled up or homeless or in housing that is not stable in any kind of way. And that comes to us from all of those avenues that we were just talking about. Like, it's a lot of counselors calling and saying, I was just talking to this family and they're in this situation, or teachers, or, there's just a lot of avenues that information comes to us. And sometimes it comes directly from families reaching out, but a lot of times it comes through other avenues. And so she's working on making referrals to get them on wait lists for housing. She's working with our youth that are unaccompanied around getting them connected to resources so that they can, like New Avenues for Youth, that really work on just connecting our young adults or young high school students, usually middle school sometimes, to services so that they can kind of continue with their goals in life. We also push out on a regular basis what housing resources we know about that come to us. And again, counselors are a huge avenue for us to communicate that to families. All of these things are also on our website. Around COVID in particular, we did push out a lot of communication because there was some legislative changes around evictions and things like that. So we pushed out legal resources that are available for families that might be looking or in insecure housing or possibly experiencing homelessness. So those resources are communicated and pushed out to our families and available on our website. And then there's our Sun Partners. We do have a few, there's like a really incredible program at Earl Boyles that's around a family stabilization or a housing stabilization project. And that's a partnership with Home Forward, ERCO, and Multnomah County. And so it's that's a really incredible program in one of our elementary schools.
Thank you, Mary. And I do see it's 8, so I'm going to pause here. We did not discuss, there is a slide specifically on some of the childcare support. Also our native language support and all of the work our liaison department's been doing and continues to do. And then some of the funding support, specifically thinking about our Kids Fund, our Celtic Arc, or how our David Douglas Foundations truly help. And then obviously we've had the CARES Act, we'll have CARES Act 2 coming as well. But at this point, I'm going to stop and turn it back over to Andrea.
You can get the slide deck down too. That would be helpful. I just want to say thank you all so much for not only the really thorough and thoughtful presentation, but the work, honestly, behind the presentation and the efforts that you all are putting into making progress on these goals in the middle of, again, everything else that's going on. It's very clear that you all are really being thoughtful and I think reflective of David Douglas and really the exemplary team that we have. So thank you so much for answering all of our questions, for your commitment to this work, and for the report in particular. It's very, very helpful, at least for me, given that, you know, this is a full-time. Thanks so much, Stephanie. Appreciate it. You know, outside of, you know, our full-time work. So it's just really helpful to get these updates when and wherever possible. I know that we are at time. I know folks are tired. Sahar, did you have anything else to add before we wrap up?
You said it really well. Again, we say it every time. These are not normal times. I was just actually chatting with a teacher in a neighboring district and just like checking in. How are things doing? You know, like your whole world got turned upside down, and how you teach. And like you all were saying, it's like you're a teacher for the first time. And so, yeah, just a support we're providing educators as well as the families, and appreciated seeing all of this, and would love to also just like continue kind of seeing how this is going, this kind of summary of like the various things that are going on. I think it's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. If there are no other questions or comments, we can go ahead and close out. I know that the board does have access to the workshop, or excuse me, the slides. So if there are additional pieces of information, feel free to review in there, follow up with myself or Ken directly if you have additional questions or clarifications. Thank you all so much again for all of this. This is very helpful. With that, I will close it out. I have 8:04.